My ruthless husband brutally attacked my 7-year-old son from my first marriage. When I found him, fear filled his eyes, and he said nothing. Desperate for answers, I secretly activated a hidden camera. What I saw left me stunned. My husband's shocking actions were captured on tape. I called the police, but just as they were about to arrive, an unexpected event unfolded that left everyone gasping in disbelief. My name is Lisa, and I'm 37 years old. I live in the vibrant city of Denver with my 7-year-old son, Ethan. My life has been a whirlwind of responsibilities and joys, but let me take you back to how it all began. The moment I thought I had found my perfect partner. 2 years ago, I attended a local business conference focused on green initiatives. I was excited. This was a chance to network, learn new strategies for my role as a marketing manager, and connect with like-minded individuals. Little did I know, this conference would change my life forever. At the conference, I met Brian. He was a successful lawyer for the city, tall with dark hair and a charming smile that lit up the room. He was 47, a decade older than me, but age didn't seem to matter when we started talking. Our conversation flowed effortlessly. He was intelligent and had this warmth about him that drew people in. I remember thinking how refreshing it was to speak to someone who was not only articulate, but also genuinely interested in what I had to say. After the conference, we kept in touch, and soon we were dating. Everything felt right. I thought I had finally found someone who understood me. Brian was great with Ethan, who instantly took a liking to him. They would often play games, and I enjoyed watching them bond. It felt like a family, a real family. Within a year, we decided to get married. Brian moved into my cozy suburban home, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. He was helpful around the house, often picking up Ethan from school when I was caught up at work. "You know, I'm getting good at this parenting thing," he would tease, flashing that charming smile. I laughed, grateful for the support. But as time went on, I started to notice changes, not just in Brian but also in Ethan. My once lively and cheerful boy began to withdraw. He was no longer the giggling child I knew. Instead, he grew quiet and distant, avoiding eye contact and retreating into his own little world. I tried to talk to him, asking if anything was bothering him at school or with his friends, but he would shrug and say, "I'm just tired, Mom." As a mother, those words never sat well with me. I could sense something was off. It became more concerning when I spotted a large bruise on Ethan's arm one afternoon. "What happened here, buddy?" I asked, my heart racing. He shrugged it off, saying it was from a fall at the playground. But my maternal instinct screamed that something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling that the bruise was just the tip of the iceberg. That night, as I tucked him into bed, I brushed his hair back and tried to lighten the mood. "Hey, space cadet. Planning a trip to the moon?" I joked, hoping to coax a smile. He didn't even crack a grin, just whispered, "No, Mom." The silence in his room felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I kissed his forehead and left, but I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, thoughts swirling in my mind. I kept thinking about the bruise, about his distance, and about how Brian was behaving differently too. He had started coming home later from work, often lost in thought, his demeanor shifting from warm and caring to tense and irritable. I had to find out what was going on. After a restless night, I decided to take action. I needed to know the truth. I remembered reading about hidden cameras, how they could provide evidence in situations like these. That idea lodged itself in my mind, and I began to formulate a plan. The next day, I purchased a small, discreet camera and carefully installed it in Ethan's room, making sure it was well hidden but positioned to capture everything. I hoped it wouldn't come to this, but the thought of Ethan being hurt filled me with dread. If there's something going on, I'll find out, I told myself, determination rising within me. A few days later, I reviewed the footage. My heart raced as I clicked through the videos, praying for a glimpse of normalcy. But my worst fears came true. There it was, Brian, losing his temper, yelling at Ethan. I watched in horror as he struck my little boy, the sound echoing in the silence of the room. This was not the man I had married. This was a stranger. As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt the ground beneath me crumble. How could he do this? My heart ached for Ethan, who had once filled our home with laughter. I wanted to confront Brian right then and there, but I knew I had to gather more evidence first. I couldn't act impulsively. I needed to be smart about this. The next day, I reached out to Jenna, Brian's 21-year-old daughter. I hoped she could provide insight into her father's behavior. We met at a local cafe, and as I sat across from her, I felt a mixture of anxiety and hope. "Jenna, I need to talk to you about your dad," I began, my voice trembling. She looked at me, concern etched on her face. "What about him?" I hesitated, unsure of how to frame my words. "I think something's wrong. Ethan is acting differently, and I'm worried." Jenna shifted in her seat, her eyes downcast. "I haven't had the best relationship with him, you know. He wasn't always the best father." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" I pressed. She took a deep breath, and as she spoke, the truth unfolded. Brian had been abusive toward Jenna when she was younger, a fact she had tried to bury deep inside. It was why she had distanced herself from him over the years. My heart sank further as I realized this man I had married had a history of violence. I knew then that I couldn't handle this alone. I needed a plan. "Jenna, would you be willing to help me?" I asked, urgency in my voice. "I'll do whatever it takes to stop him," she replied, determination shining in her eyes. We began to devise a plan to gather more evidence against Brian, knowing that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and uncertainty. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test my strength as a mother and lead me down a path I never expected to take. After my shocking conversation with Jenna, I felt a mix of fear and determination bubbling inside me. I had uncovered a hidden truth about Brian, and I knew I had to act swiftly. If he had hurt Jenna, then there was no telling how far he might go with Ethan. I needed to gather more evidence to protect my son, but I had to be careful. The last thing I wanted was to tip Brian off and put Ethan in more danger. Jenna and I agreed that she would arrange a meeting with Brian. She had a way of getting under his skin, and I hoped she could provoke him enough to elicit a confession. The thought of her confronting him made my stomach churn, but I knew it was necessary. We decided to meet at the cafe again to finalize our plan. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked Jenna as we sat at our usual table, the afternoon sun casting a warm glow over us. Jenna nodded, her expression serious. "I need to do this. It's time I faced him. No one should have to endure what we did." I admired her bravery, but the fear for Ethan's safety gnawed at me. "Just be careful. We need to make sure you're safe," I cautioned. "I will. I'll record the conversation on my phone," she assured me. "He won't see it coming." As the days went by, I watched Ethan closely, always on high alert. He seemed to sense my anxiety, often asking if everything was okay. I would smile and assure him that all was well, but inside, I was a bundle of nerves. The thought of what Brian might do if he sensed the tension in our home haunted me. Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. Jenna texted me just before she left to see Brian. "I'm on my way. Wish me luck." "Be safe," I replied, my heart racing as I paced the living room. I couldn't focus on anything else. Time stretched out, each minute feeling like an eternity. I kept replaying the possibilities in my mind. What if Brian got angry? What if he turned violent? An hour later, I received a text from Jenna. "I got him to talk. I'll come over now." My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for her to arrive. When Jenna finally walked through the door, she looked shaken but determined. "I got it," she said, pulling out her phone. He admitted it. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of dread. "What did he say?" I asked, my voice trembling. Jenna played the recording, and as Brian's voice filled the room, I felt sick. "You were too weak, Jenna. I had to show you discipline. And Ethan? He needs to learn respect. Sometimes, tough love is the only way." Listening to those words made my blood run cold. I couldn't believe I had let this man into our lives. "We have to go to the police with this," I said, my voice steadying with newfound resolve. "I agree, but we need more evidence." "One recording may not be enough," Jenna replied, her eyes bright with determination. I nodded, realizing she was right. "I'll keep the camera in Ethan's room and monitor it closely." We need to capture anything else that might happen. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, I couldn't shake the sense of unease. Do you feel safe, buddy? I asked, brushing his hair back. He looked up at me, those big brown eyes filled with innocence. Of course, Mom. Why wouldn't I? I forced a smile, but inside, I was a storm of worry. I kissed his forehead and left the room, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what was happening beneath our roof. Over the next few days, I kept the camera rolling, checking the footage daily. My stomach twisted with each viewing, hoping for a glimpse of normalcy, but instead, I was met with more of Brian's explosive anger. He would come home late, often already in a foul mood, and I would hear him yelling at Ethan for minor mistakes, like not cleaning up his toys or leaving the bathroom light on. I was horrified. How could he treat my sweet boy this way? I whispered to myself as I replayed the recordings. One evening, after another episode of Brian's fury, I decided to confront him. We need to talk, I said firmly, my heart racing. Brian looked up from his paper, surprise crossing his face. About what? About how you're treating Ethan. He's just a child, I exclaimed, trying to keep my voice steady. His expression hardened. You're overreacting, Lisa.
Kids need discipline.
They need to understand consequences.
No.
This isn't discipline, it's abuse. I shot back, feeling the heat rise in my chest. He stood up, towering over me. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm doing what's best for him. The argument escalated, and I could feel the air between us crackle with tension. I had to stay strong for Ethan. I won't let you hurt him anymore. I'll go to the police if I have to. Brian's eyes darkened, and I saw a flicker of something dangerous there. You really think that will end well for you? He warned, his voice low and menacing. I stepped back, suddenly afraid. I'll protect my son, I declared, though doubt crept into my mind. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about what I had said. I was determined to protect Ethan, no matter the cost. The camera kept rolling, and I would do whatever it took to ensure my son's safety. The tension in our home was palpable, and I knew I was on a collision course with the man I had once loved. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was only just beginning. The days following my confrontation with Brian were filled with a heavy tension that seemed to suffocate our home. I kept the camera rolling, hoping to catch something, anything, that would prove his abusive behavior. Each time I checked the footage, dread clawed at my insides. The man I once thought I knew had become a stranger, someone I feared might truly harm my child. Ethan remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around us. He continued to be his sweet, curious self, asking questions about the world and drawing pictures of superheroes. I admired his resilience, but I could see glimpses of unease in his eyes when Brian was around. It broke my heart. One evening, as I prepared dinner, I heard the front door slam. My heart raced. Brian was home early. I quickly glanced at the camera feed on my phone, seeing him storm into the living room. The tension was palpable, and I knew something was about to happen. Ethan, playing with his toys on the floor, looked up at Brian, his face lighting up for a brief moment. Dad, look at what I made, he said, holding up a crumpled paper rocket. Instead of encouragement, Brian's face twisted in annoyance. What is that mess? Don't you know how to clean up after yourself? He snapped, his voice sharp. I felt a surge of anger. How could he talk to Ethan that way? I wanted to rush in, but I knew I needed to gather more evidence. So, I stood frozen in the kitchen, watching the scene unfold through the camera. Ethan's smile faded, and he dropped the rocket.
I'm sorry, Dad.
I was just trying to have fun, he said quietly. Brian's eyes darkened. Fun? You think this is fun? You need to learn some respect, he shouted, his face reddening with rage. In that moment, I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed into the living room, adrenaline surging through my veins. Brian, stop. He's just a child, I shouted, my voice rising above his. He turned to me, surprise flickering across his face before morphing into anger. Stay out of this, Lisa. You have no idea what you're talking about. Enough. You need to treat him with love, not anger, I pleaded, stepping between Brian and Ethan. Love? This kid needs discipline. You're making him weak, he spat back, his fists clenched at his sides. I stood my ground, refusing to back down. No, Brian. You're the one who's weak. Hitting a child is not discipline. It's abuse. At that moment, the room was charged with tension, and I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. I couldn't let him continue this way. I'm taking this to the police, I declared, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. Brian laughed, a cold, bitter sound that sent chills down my spine. You really think that will end well for you? You'll regret this, Lisa. My heart raced as I realized the danger I was putting myself and Ethan in. I'm protecting my son, Brian. That's all that matters. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. You'll regret this decision. You think you're the victim here? You don't know what you're asking for. Just then, Ethan, sensing the rising tension, tugged at my shirt. Mom, I'm scared, he whispered, his small voice trembling. I knelt down, wrapping my arms around him. It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe, I reassured him, but inside I was terrified. I could feel the walls closing in, and I knew I had to act quickly. As the night wore on, I lay awake in bed, my mind racing. Brian's threats echoed in my head. I couldn't let fear dictate my actions. I had to protect Ethan at all costs. The next morning, I made a decision. I would gather the recordings and evidence I had collected over the past weeks and go to the police. I couldn't let Brian's abuse go unchecked any longer. When Ethan woke up, I hugged him tightly, determined to shield him from the darkness that loomed over us. I love you, buddy. Remember that, no matter what happens, I whispered, kissing the top of his head. As I prepared to confront the police, I felt a mix of fear and hope. This was the moment I had been waiting for, but it was also the moment I feared most. Would they believe me? Would they protect Ethan? With my heart pounding, I gathered the recordings, my resolve hardening. I was ready to fight for my son, ready to face the monster I had once called my husband. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but I knew I had to be brave. For Ethan's sake, I had to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The day I decided to go to the police felt like stepping into a storm. My heart pounded in my chest as I held the recordings tightly in my hands, each one a painful reminder of what Brian had done to Ethan. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was doing this to protect my son. He needed me to be brave, and I wouldn't let him down. As I drove to the police station, the streets of Denver felt unfamiliar, almost surreal. I could hardly concentrate on the road, my mind swirling with doubt and fear. What if they didn't believe me? What if Brian found out? But I pushed those thoughts aside. I had to focus on Ethan. I had to do this for him. When I arrived, I parked the car and sat for a moment, staring at the building. The reality of my situation sank in. I was about to report my husband for child abuse. I felt like I was stepping into a new world, one filled with uncertainty, but also with hope. Taking a deep breath, I entered the police station, my heart racing. I approached the front desk, trying to project confidence even as my hands trembled. I need to report child abuse, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. The officer looked up, concern evident on his face. Of course, ma'am. Let me take you to an interview room. He led me down a corridor, and as I walked, I felt the weight of my decision pressing down on me. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for, yet it felt monumental. In the interview room, I sat across from a detective named Officer Ramirez. She had a kind demeanor, which put me slightly at ease. Can you tell me what's been happening? She asked, her voice gentle but firm. I began recounting everything, the bruises on Ethan's arms, the recordings of Brian's anger, and Jenna's revelations about her own past with him. As I spoke, I felt the fear begin to lift, replaced by a sense of empowerment. I have recordings, I said, my voice gaining strength. I captured him losing his temper, hitting my son. Officer Ramirez nodded, her expression serious. We need to see those recordings, Lisa. They could be crucial evidence. I handed over my phone, my hands shaking as she reviewed the footage. Watching the expressions on her face, disbelief, anger, and finally, determination, filled me with a sense of relief. "This is very serious," she said, her voice steady. "We're going to take this very seriously." After what felt like hours, I left the police station, my heart racing. I had done it. I had taken the first step toward protecting Ethan. Now, all I could do was wait and hope for the best. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. The police launched an investigation, interviewing Ethan and gathering evidence. Brian was unaware of what was happening, and I felt an odd sense of peace knowing that he was still in the dark. Then came the day I had both anticipated and dreaded. Brian was called in for questioning. I watched from a distance, my stomach churning. Would he try to manipulate the situation? Would he lie his way out of it? When the police finally called me in to discuss their findings, I held my breath. "We've gathered enough evidence to charge him with child abuse," Officer Ramirez informed me, her tone serious but reassuring. "We'll be filing charges soon." A wave of relief washed over me. Finally, I felt like I could breathe. The truth was out, and Brian would have to face the consequences of his actions. As the legal proceedings unfolded, I stood firm. Jenna testified about her experiences, adding weight to the case against Brian. I spoke passionately about the recordings, detailing the fear I had for Ethan. Finally, the day of the verdict arrived. I sat in the courtroom, my heart racing as the judge announced, "We find the defendant, Brian, guilty of child abuse." Tears filled my eyes. I had fought so hard for my son, and finally, justice had been served. Brian was sentenced to prison, and as he was led away, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a newfound strength. With Brian gone, Ethan and I began to rebuild our lives. We moved into a cozy new apartment, free from the shadows of the past. Slowly, Ethan regained his laughter and joy. I watched as he made new friends and found comfort in his art, creating colorful drawings filled with superheroes and adventure. Jenna also became a significant part of our lives, visiting often. Together, we formed a bond that helped us both heal from the trauma we had endured. Reflecting on our journey, I realized that love is a powerful force. My love for Ethan had driven me to confront the darkness, to uncover the truth, and to fight for justice. Together, we emerged stronger, ready to embrace the future, hand in hand. As I watched Ethan play one sunny afternoon, I smiled, knowing that we were free and that I would always protect him, no matter what. We were finally free, and the road ahead was bright with possibility. During a family trip to the lake, we were boating when suddenly my cruel husband stopped the boat. My ruthless husband and mother-in-law forcibly removed my life jacket and said, "Finally, your chapter is over. We'll never see you again." They both pushed me into the lake and left me to die as they moved away. However, I survived bravely and saved my life. The very next day, I returned and gave them a shocking surprise when they woke up. My name is Sarah Miller, and for a while, I thought I was living a dream life. I married James, my college sweetheart, the man I thought I'd grow old with. I fell for him in my sophomore year. He was charming, thoughtful, and made me feel like the most important person in the world. After graduation, we decided to take the next step and got married. I couldn't have been happier. We settled in a cozy home near Lake Tahoe, California. It was beautiful, serene, and everything I imagined our life would be. James worked as a Navy officer, a job that gave him pride and purpose. I admired him for his dedication, and he made me feel so loved in return. His mother, Margaret, was initially very welcoming. Before the wedding, she treated me like a daughter. She would compliment me, share family recipes, and even give me advice about married life. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have such a supportive mother-in-law. But as I was about to learn, appearances can be deceiving. The first year of marriage was blissful. James would come home and talk to me about his day, and we'd plan little outings by the lake on weekends. We both loved boating, and those trips felt like an escape from the world. Margaret would visit occasionally, and she seemed genuinely happy for us. Life felt perfect. But things started to change in the second year of our marriage. It began with subtle comments from Margaret. "Sarah, when are you planning to make me a grandmother?" she'd ask, her tone light but insistent. At first, I laughed it off. Whenever the time is right, Margaret. We're just enjoying our time together for now. But her remarks became more frequent, and James started echoing them. What was once a casual conversation became a pointed demand. They told me I needed to focus on starting a family, that it was my duty as a wife. I explained that these things couldn't be forced, but they wouldn't listen. "You've got 3 months, Sarah," Margaret finally said one evening, her voice cold. "If you're not pregnant by then, we'll have to reevaluate your place in this family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. James sat silently, avoiding my eyes, as though he agreed with her. I felt like my entire world was shifting beneath me. I loved James deeply and wanted to have children with him someday, but this pressure, this ultimatum, it was suffocating. As I tried to process their growing hostility, I noticed other changes in James. He became distant. The man who once showered me with affection now seemed preoccupied, distracted. I chalked it up to stress from his job, but something in my gut told me it was more than that. Margaret, too, began acting colder toward me. She stopped visiting as often, and, when she did, her warmth was gone. She would criticize little things, how I kept the house, the meals I cooked, my appearance. It felt like I could do nothing right in her eyes. One night, I finally confronted James. "What's happening to us?" I asked, tears brimming in my eyes. "You've changed, James. You're not the man I married." He looked at me with a mix of guilt and frustration. "I'm just under a lot of pressure, Sarah. Margaret is worried about the family's future, and I don't know how to handle it." His words didn't comfort me. They only added to my unease. I started feeling like an outsider in my own marriage, and my once loving home began to feel like a prison. What I didn't know then was that James was hiding a secret, one that would shatter the life I thought we had built together. He was having an affair with Angela Harris, a wealthy businesswoman who had been financing his extravagant lifestyle behind my back. Margaret, ever the schemer, fully supported this relationship. To her, Angela was a better fit for James, richer, more influential. And, together, they were plotting to remove me from the picture entirely. But I didn't suspect any of this at the time. I was still clinging to the hope that we could fix our marriage, that this was just a rough patch. Even when Margaret's demands became crueler and James's affection grew colder, I tried to convince myself that love could conquer all. Then came the day that changed everything. James came home unusually cheerful and suggested a trip to the lake. "You've been so stressed lately," he said, flashing me a smile I hadn't seen in months. "Let's go boating this weekend. Just the 3 of us, you, me, and Mom." I was taken aback, but cautiously hopeful. Maybe he was trying to mend things between us. Maybe this was his way of saying he still cared. I agreed, despite the nagging feeling in my gut that something was off. When the day arrived, I felt a mix of excitement and unease. Margaret, too, was uncharacteristically pleasant, even offering to pack snacks for the trip. We drove to the lake together, and for the first time in months, they seemed almost happy. I wanted to believe it was genuine, but something about their smiles felt forced, calculated. Still, I pushed those thoughts aside. I loved boating, and the idea of being out on the water was enough to lift my spirits. We rented a small boat, and James handed each of us a life jacket. "Safety first," he said with a grin. I smiled back, trying to ignore the strange tension in the air. As the boat set off, I let myself relax, focusing on the gentle waves and the warm sun on my skin. For a brief moment, I felt at peace, but that peace was short-lived. As the boat drifted into deeper waters, James and Margaret's demeanor began to shift. Their cheerful facade cracked, replaced by something darker. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being led into a trap, but I couldn't imagine what was coming next. And then they stopped the boat. "Sarah," James said, his voice chillingly calm, "we need to talk." As the boat came to a stop in the middle of the lake, I felt an icy chill run through me. It wasn't from the water or the breeze. It was the look on James's face. His expression was eerily calm, almost too calm, and Margaret sat beside him, her arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. "Sarah," James began, looking at me like a stranger, not the man I had loved and married. We need to talk about your future, or rather, your lack of one. I blinked, trying to process his words. What do you mean? I asked, my voice trembling. Margaret laughed, a cold, harsh sound that made my stomach twist. Oh, don't act surprised, Sarah. You must have noticed by now that you're no longer welcome in this family. My heart pounded in my chest. What are you talking about? I've done everything I can to make this marriage work. James shrugged, his calm demeanor unnerving. It's not enough. Angela is willing to give me a life you never could. She's wealthy, supportive, and ready to start a family. You, on the other hand, are expendable.
Angela.
The name hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd heard James mention her in passing before, but I had no idea she was part of his life in this way. My mind raced, trying to understand how everything had unraveled so completely. Margaret leaned forward, her voice dripping with venom. We've been patient, Sarah, but it's clear you're just wasting our time. It's better for everyone if you're out of the picture.
Panic clawed at my chest.
Out of the picture? I repeated, my voice shaking. What does that mean? James stood up, his expression darkening. It means this is the end for you. Before I could react, he grabbed me by the shoulders, pulling me to my feet. I struggled against him, but Margaret joined in, her hands ripping at the straps of my life jacket. I screamed, begging them to stop, but they only laughed, cold, heartless laughter that made my blood run cold. Goodbye, Sarah, Margaret sneered as she yanked the life jacket off me.
No.
Please, I shouted, tears streaming down my face. Don't do this. I'll leave, I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. But they didn't care. Together, they shoved me over the side of the boat. I hit the water with a splash, the cold instantly biting into my skin. I flailed, trying to keep my head above the surface as I watched the boat drift farther away. James and Margaret stood at the edge, their figures silhouetted against the sun. They were laughing. She can't swim, Margaret said smugly. It's over. My heart sank as I realized their plan. They thought I'd drown, that I'd never make it to shore. But they had underestimated me. What they didn't know was that I loved swimming. It was one of the reasons I had always loved boating. Despite the shock and fear coursing through me, I forced myself to focus. I took deep breaths, calming my racing heart. I knew panicking would only make things worse. I started swimming, keeping my strokes steady and strong, pushing through the water with every ounce of strength I had. The shore seemed impossibly far, but I refused to give up. As I swam, I heard the sound of another boat in the distance. I turned my head and saw two people, a man and a woman, staring in my direction. They were too far away to hear me, but they could see what had happened. One of them raised a phone, pointing it toward James's boat, which was now speeding away. I kept swimming, my arms and legs burning with the effort. I didn't know if I could make it to them, but I didn't have to. The other boat turned toward me, and within moments, I felt strong hands pulling me out of the water. Are you okay? The man asked, his voice filled with concern. I couldn't speak. I was gasping for air, shaking from the cold and the shock of what had just happened. The woman handed me a blanket, wrapping it around my shoulders as tears streamed down my face. They tried to kill me. I finally managed to choke out. My husband and his mother, they threw me into the lake. They thought I'd drown. The man's expression hardened.
I saw everything, he said.
We have it on video. Don't worry. We'll make sure they pay for this. His words gave me a glimmer of hope, a small light in the darkness. They told me their names. Andrew and Emily Carter. Andrew was a lawyer, and Emily was his sister. They had been out on the lake enjoying a quiet day when they witnessed the horrifying scene. We're taking you to shore, Andrew said firmly. You'll be safe. And I'll make sure those two never get away with this. As the boat sped toward land, I clutched the blanket tightly around me, my mind racing. My husband, the man I had trusted with my life, had just tried to take it away. Margaret, who I had once thought of as a second mother, had been complicit in it all. I felt a mix of anger, heartbreak, and determination. They had betrayed me in the cruelest way possible, but I was still here. And I wasn't going to let them win. When we reached the shore, Andrew and Emily helped me to their car and drove me to my parents' house. My parents were shocked when they saw me, soaking wet, shaking, and crying uncontrollably. I told them everything, from the betrayal to the attack on the boat. My father's face turned red with anger, while my mother hugged me tightly, sobbing into my shoulder. "We'll fight this," my father said, his voice firm. "They won't get away with what they've done." Andrew nodded. "With the video evidence we have, we can build a strong case. Justice will be served." That night, as I lay in bed, my mind kept replaying the events on the boat. The betrayal, the laughter, the coldness in their eyes. It was a nightmare I couldn't escape. But I also thought about Andrew and Emily, about the video evidence they had captured. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. James and Margaret had tried to destroy me, but they had failed. Now it was my turn to fight back. The morning after that horrifying night, I woke up at my parents' house, still shaken but determined. I couldn't stop thinking about the betrayal, the coldness in James's eyes, and Margaret's cruel laugh. The memories haunted me, but I wasn't going to let them win. They thought they had silenced me forever, but I was alive, and I would make sure they faced justice. Andrew Carter, the lawyer who had saved me, arrived that morning with his sister Emily. They had spent the night reviewing the video evidence and preparing a plan. Andrew's confidence gave me strength. "Sarah," he said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, "the video we have is solid evidence. It clearly shows James and Margaret pushing you overboard, and their laughter afterward proves intent. This isn't just an accident, it's a premeditated crime." Hearing those words made my stomach turn, but I nodded. "What do we do next?" "We filed charges immediately," Andrew said. "We'll accuse them of attempted murder and conspiracy. This is a serious case, and with the evidence we have, the law is on your side." My parents supported me completely. My father, ever the protective parent, was furious. "They deserve to rot in prison for what they've done," he said through gritted teeth. My mother, meanwhile, held my hand and kept repeating, "You're so strong, Sarah. We're here for you." We went to the police station later that day to file the charges. Andrew accompanied us, his briefcase full of documentation and the video on a USB drive. When we explained the situation to the officers, they were horrified. The detective assigned to the case, Detective Collins, took our statements and promised swift action. "This video will make all the difference," he said. "We'll start by bringing them in for questioning." For the first time since the attack, I felt a sense of power returning to me. James and Margaret had treated me like I was disposable, but they had underestimated me. I wasn't going to hide or let fear paralyze me. I would confront them head-on. The next few days were a whirlwind. The police arrested James and Margaret at their home. I wasn't there to see it, but Detective Collins told me that both of them looked stunned. They hadn't expected me to survive, let alone take legal action. I could only imagine the looks on their faces when they saw the evidence against them. The case moved quickly. Andrew worked tirelessly, preparing every detail. He explained the legal process to me step by step, making sure I felt informed and empowered. We were charging them with attempted murder, and Andrew was confident we had a strong case. When the court date arrived, I was nervous but determined. As I walked into the courtroom, I saw James and Margaret sitting at the defendant's table. Their expressions were a mix of shock and defiance. It was clear they hadn't expected to see me alive, much less ready to testify against them. Andrew started by presenting the video evidence. The room went silent as the footage played. The sound of their laughter as they threw me overboard sent chills through everyone in the courtroom. The prosecutor pointed out how their actions were premeditated, deliberate, and heartless. James's lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that they had panicked and thought I was already dead when they left the scene. But the video and my testimony painted a very different picture. The jury could see through their lies. When it was my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and spoke from the heart. I described the years of emotional abuse, the ultimatum they gave me, and how I had trusted them right up until the moment they tried to kill me. "James was the man I thought I'd spend my life with," I said, my voice trembling but steady. And Margaret, she was like a second mother to me. But they betrayed me in the worst way possible. They tried to end my life because I didn't fit into their plans anymore. But I'm still here, and I'm here to make sure they face the consequences of their actions.
The courtroom was silent as I finished.
I could see the jury members exchanging glances, their expressions grim. James and Margaret avoided looking at me, their once confident demeanor crumbling. Andrew's closing argument was powerful. He emphasized the cruelty and calculation behind their actions, and how they had underestimated me. He painted a clear picture of two people who thought they were untouchable, but who had been caught red-handed. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the evidence was overwhelmingly in my favor. The video, the witness testimony from Andrew and Emily, and my own account left no room for doubt. I could see James and Margaret growing more desperate with each passing day. Finally, the jury reached a verdict, guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced both of them to life imprisonment without parole for their premeditated attempt on my life. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Justice had been served. James and Margaret had tried to destroy me, but they had failed. They would spend the rest of their lives paying for what they had done. As I left the courtroom that day, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and triumph. They had taken so much from me, but they hadn't taken my will to fight. I was still standing, and I was ready to rebuild my life. When the trial ended and the verdict was announced, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. James and Margaret had been found guilty, and their sentence, life imprisonment, was a testament to their cruelty and the justice they deserved. But even as the weight lifted off my shoulders, the scars they left behind were still there. Leaving the courtroom, I was greeted by my parents, Andrew and Emily. They embraced me tightly, their support a reminder that I wasn't alone in this battle. Andrew, who had been my pillar of strength throughout the trial, smiled and said, "You did it, Sarah. You stood up for yourself, and now they'll never hurt you again." I nodded, tears in my eyes. I couldn't have done it without all of you. You saved my life, not just on that boat, but in every way after. The weeks that followed were a mix of healing and reflection. I stayed with my parents for a while, allowing myself the time to process everything. The betrayal I had experienced still stung, but I refused to let it define me. I began seeing a counselor to help me work through the trauma, and with each session, I felt a little stronger. Andrew and Emily remained close friends, checking in on me regularly. One day, Andrew visited with some news. "I thought you should know," he said. "James and Margaret tried to appeal the sentence, but the court denied it. They're going to serve their full time." I felt a surge of vindication. "Good," I said firmly. "They deserve to pay for what they did." As the months went by, I started to rebuild my life. I returned to my hobbies, especially boating. It was strange at first. I had to confront my fears and remind myself that the lake wasn't my enemy. It was a place I loved, a part of my life that James and Margaret couldn't take away from me. Slowly, I reclaimed it. I also began exploring new opportunities. I went back to school to study counseling, inspired by the help I had received during my recovery. I wanted to support others who had faced similar betrayals, to be a beacon of hope for those who felt lost. One evening, as I sat by the lake watching the sunset, Emily joined me. She handed me a small notebook. "What's this?" I asked, flipping it open. "A journal," she said with a smile. "You've been through so much, Sarah. Maybe writing it down will help you find closure." I took her advice and began writing my story. The love I thought I had, the betrayal, the survival, and the justice I fought for. Each page felt like a step toward healing, a way to make sense of everything I had endured. In time, I realized that while James and Margaret had taken so much from me, they hadn't taken everything. They hadn't taken my resilience, my determination, or my ability to start over. I was still standing, stronger than ever. Looking back now, I see my story not as one of betrayal, but of survival and triumph. I've learned that even in the darkest moments, there's always a path forward. I've found new purpose, surrounded by people who truly care for me. James and Margaret are where they belong, and I'm free, free to live, free to love, and free to be the person I was always meant to be.
This story is titled, My Wife Cheated and Stole for Her Affair Partner, then tried to come back after he scammed her. My revenge was perfect. Hey everyone! The channel's been slowing down a bit, and I spend so much time finding these stories for you. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button. It means the world and helps keep this journey going strong. Let's grow together. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, So, I 35 male, a dad to 2 great kids, Emma, 10 female, and Liam, 7 male. Life seemed good. Better than good, actually. I ran my own construction business, which I built from the ground up, and I thought my wife, Amber, and I had a strong marriage after over a decade together. Looking back, I should have seen the cracks forming. It started with little things, stuff you'd brush off if you weren't paying attention. Amber would zone out more often, glued to her phone. Then one morning, she looked at me over her coffee and said, You're looking kind of pale. Are you feeling okay? I shrugged it off. Just overworked, I said, pouring myself another coffee like that was going to fix everything. Running a business, being a dad, trying to juggle everything, it wears you down, you know? But deep down, I felt off. No matter how much sleep I got or how healthy I tried to eat, I felt drained all the time. Amber mentioned it again a week later. You sure you're not coming down with something? She asked, half worried, half distracted as she scrolled through her phone. That's when I finally caved and went to the doctor, figuring I'd get some vitamins or maybe a lecture about stress management. The last thing I expected was to be sitting in that sterile little office, staring at my doctor as she told me I had tested positive for chlamydia. At first, I just sat there like an idiot, trying to process what she'd said. That's not possible, I managed to get out. I've been married for over a decade. These infections can go unnoticed for a long time, she explained. You'll need to discuss this with your partner. I left that office feeling like someone had pulled the ground out from under me. Married for 11 years. 11! I'd never so much as looked at another woman in that way. So how the hell could this have happened? When I got home, Amber was sitting at the kitchen counter, sipping one of her fancy iced coffees and scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled at me, all casual, like nothing had changed. For a split second, I wondered if this was all some huge mistake, some weird mix-up at the clinic. But that feeling didn't last long. Hey, she said, how was your appointment? Fine, I lied, forcing myself to sound normal. I wasn't ready to talk, not yet. If something was going on, I needed to know the truth before I opened that can of worms. By morning, I had a plan. If there was one thing I'd learned from running a business, it was not to make decisions without facts. So I reached out to Rick, a private investigator I'd hired once for a messy contract dispute at work. I need you to look into something personal, I told him. It's about my wife. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but something's not adding up. Rick didn't ask a lot of questions. Send me everything you've got, he said. Give me a week. For the next few days, I acted like nothing was wrong. I went to work, helped the kids with their homework, and even laughed at Amber's stories about her day. But inside, I was a mess. Every time she smiled at me, I felt this knot in my stomach, like I was living with a stranger. When Rick called me a week later, I wasn't ready for what he had to say. But at the same time, I was. You were right to be suspicious, he told me. Your wife's been meeting up with someone, a guy named Derek. Hearing the name felt like a punch to the gut. Derek. Some guy I didn't even know was suddenly the center of my world. Rick didn't stop there. They've been seeing each other for a few months now. It started at the gym, but it's escalated. Hotels, dinners, even trips to your family cabin. The cabin. That was supposed to be our family's getaway, a place where we made memories with the kids. Knowing she'd taken him there felt like the ultimate betrayal. I thanked Rick and hung up, my hands shaking. I didn't confront Amber that night or the next. Instead, I focused on getting my head straight. If this guy thought he could waltz into my life and wreck it, he had another thing coming. And Amber? She had no idea who she was messing with. Rick gave me the details. Times, dates, even some pictures. Amber wasn't just meeting Derek for coffee or friendly chats. They were going full-on secret romance mode. But instead of confronting Amber, I kept my cool. I knew better than to blow up without a plan. I needed more proof, not just for my own sanity, but for what might come next. Rick didn't just stop with the basics. He dug into Derek's background, and let me tell you, this guy was a real piece of work. He wasn't just some gym trainer who'd caught Amber's eye. No, he had a history, a long one. Turns out Derek was a professional scam artist. His MO was finding women who were married, well off or both, charming them, and bleeding them dry. He'd already conned 2 women out of their savings and skipped town when things got messy. It made my stomach turn. Amber wasn't just cheating, she was getting played. And if she thought Derek cared about her beyond the money, she was dead wrong. Rick's investigation also turned up something even worse. Amber had started funneling money out of our joint accounts. Little amounts at first, ones I wouldn't notice right away. 100 here, a couple hundred there. But then the withdrawals got bigger, like she was getting desperate. She'd already drained nearly $50,000. And as if that wasn't bad enough, she'd forged my signature to start the process of selling the cabin. That was the last straw for me. I knew I needed to act. This wasn't just about catching her in the act or exposing her lies. I had to protect my kids, my business, and my future. But I couldn't go into this half-cocked. Derek was dangerous, and Amber clearly wasn't thinking straight. I called Rick again and told him to dig deeper. I want everything, I said. Every bank transaction, every meeting, every text message if you can get it. Rick didn't hesitate. Give me a couple of days, he said. While I waited, I played my part. I acted like everything was fine. I went to work, helped the kids with their school projects, and even smiled when Amber gave me her excuses about why she was coming home late or spending weekends catching up with friends. It was infuriating, but I knew I had to stay calm. If I tipped her off, she'd go into damage control mode, and I'd lose my chance to get the upper hand. When Rick called me back, he had everything I needed. Amber wasn't just in over her head with Derek. She was panicking. Derek had started pressuring her for more money, threatening to expose their affair if she didn't deliver. He had incriminating photos, texts, enough to blow up her life if he wanted to. She was scrambling to keep him happy, even at the cost of everything we'd built together. I sat down with Rick and laid out my plan. We're not just catching them, I said. We're ending this. For good. Rick nodded. You're doing the right thing, he said. But you need to be prepared. This is going to get messy. Messy didn't even begin to cover it, but I was ready. Amber and Derek had made their choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. The first thing I did was lock everything down. Joint bank accounts? Frozen. The cabin's paperwork. Pulled it from escrow and flagged the sale. My business? Changed every single password and secured all financials. Amber had no idea any of this was happening. She was too busy sneaking around and trying to keep Derek happy to notice the walls closing in. I kept playing dumb. I acted distracted, like work was overwhelming me, and I made a point of staying up late pretending to catch up on paperwork. You okay? Amber asked one night, leaning in the doorway. You've been so stressed lately. I smiled and shrugged, just trying to stay ahead of things. She nodded, looking almost sympathetic, which made me want to laugh. Here she was, playing house like nothing was wrong, while I was quietly dismantling her entire game. But I kept my cool. I knew better than to tip my hand too early. Rick kept feeding me updates. Derek, true to form, was starting to lose patience. He wanted more money, and Amber was running out of options. She'd already drained what she could from our accounts, and now she was looking into personal loans. She was in way over her head, and Derek knew it. He's getting sloppy, Rick told me during one of our late-night calls. He's pushing her harder, but he's also making mistakes. We've got enough to take him down whenever you're ready. One night, Amber told me she was meeting up with friends for dinner. I knew exactly where she was going and who she'd be with, thanks to Rick's tracking. Have fun, I said, kissing her on the cheek like nothing was wrong. Don't stay out too late. As soon as she left, I grabbed my keys and headed out. I parked a few blocks away from Derek's apartment and waited. Sure enough, Amber's car pulled up, and she went inside. I texted Rick to let him know. They're together, I wrote. Time to make the call. Rick had already tipped off the police about Derek's blackmail operation. He had enough evidence to connect Derek to multiple scams, not just the one involving Amber. Within an hour, the cops showed up. I watched from my car as they raided the apartment, dragging Derek out in cuffs. Amber came out right behind him, screaming and trying to explain herself, but the cops weren't having it. She saw me standing on the sidewalk as they loaded her into the back of a squad car. Noah! She yelled, her voice cracking. What are you doing here? Help me! I crossed my arms and shook my head. You did this to yourself, I said. You made your choices. The look on her face was a mix of shock and panic. She tried to keep shouting, but the cops slammed the door, cutting her off. I stood there for a moment, watching as the squad cars drove away. It was a strange feeling, part relief, part sadness. I wasn't celebrating. This wasn't a victory, but it was justice. The fallout came fast. Amber's arrest made the local news, especially once Derek's history came to light. People love a juicy scandal, and this was about as messy as it gets. I filed for divorce the next morning, armed with all the evidence Rick had gathered. The court didn't even hesitate. They gave me full custody of Emma and Liam, granted me control of all our shared assets, and ordered Amber to pay back every cent she'd taken. Derek? He was looking at serious jail time for fraud, blackmail, and identity theft. Seeing his mugshot plastered everywhere felt like closure. He wasn't going to ruin anyone else's life anytime soon. That night, I sat down with Emma and Liam and told them the truth. Well, the kid-friendly version of it. I didn't want them to hate their mom, but I also wasn't going to lie. Things are going to be different now, I told them. But we're going to be okay. I promise. They both nodded, and Liam crawled into my lap, his little arms wrapping around me. We're a team, he said, his voice muffled against my shirt. The days after Amber's arrest were chaotic, to say the least. Between the divorce filing, police interviews, and trying to keep my kids' lives as normal as possible, I barely had time to catch my breath. But honestly, it was a relief to finally have control over the situation. The lies were out in the open, and Amber and Derek's schemes were unraveling. I wish I could say Amber took it gracefully, but that's not how it went down. She started calling me nonstop from jail, begging for forgiveness, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. Derek manipulated me, she'd cry. I didn't know what I was doing. Please, Noah, think of the kids. While the kids adjusted, Amber's legal troubles kept piling up. Thanks to Rick's thorough investigation, the police had plenty of evidence against Derek and Amber, including bank records, hotel receipts, and even some not-so-flattering text exchanges. Derek's blackmail attempts sealed the deal. He was hit with multiple charges, including fraud and extortion, and was looking at years behind bars. Amber's situation wasn't much better. While she didn't face the same level of criminal charges as Derek, her involvement in the scheme, particularly the forgery and financial theft, didn't look good in court. My divorce filing didn't help her case either. With Rick's evidence, the judge ruled entirely in my favor. Full custody of the kids, control over all marital assets, and a hefty repayment order for the money she'd taken. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief mostly, but also a lingering sadness for what could have been. Amber and I had built a life together, or at least I thought we had. Letting go of that dream was harder than I expected. Even after everything she'd done, Amber didn't take the court's decision well. A week after the ruling, she showed up at the house unannounced, looking like a shell of her former self. Her hair was messy, her eyes puffy from crying, and she was clutching a folder of papers like it was her lifeline. Noah, please, she said, her voice breaking. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I was stupid and selfish, and I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try. Please let me come home. I stared at her, trying to feel something. Anger, pity, anything. But all I felt was exhaustion. Amber, it's too late, I said quietly. You didn't just hurt me. You hurt Emma and Liam. You put them at risk for some guy who didn't even care about you. There's no coming back from that. Her lip trembled, and for a second I thought she might argue. Instead, she just nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll pay you back, she whispered. Every penny. I promise. That's between you and the court now, I said, stepping back inside. Goodbye, Amber. As I closed the door, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was drowning. The chaos was finally over, and I could focus on what really mattered, my kids and our future. Once the dust settled, life found a rhythm, but it wasn't the life I had envisioned. Amber's choices had shattered the illusion of stability I once clung to, and I was left picking up the pieces for Emma, Liam, and myself. The kids and I were healing, slowly but surely, but Amber wasn't done trying to claw her way back into our lives. Her calls started again, escalating from tearful voicemails to full-on threats. If you think you can keep the kids away from me, you're wrong, she yelled in one particularly nasty message. They're my children too, Noah. That might have been true biologically, but Amber had abandoned any claim to being a real parent the moment she chose Derek over her family. The court had already ruled against her for good reason. Her neglect, financial deceit, and utter lack of accountability made her unfit. But Amber being Amber, she wasn't about to take no for an answer. One Friday night, while I was watching a movie with Emma and Liam, there was a pounding at the front door. My stomach dropped. I knew it wasn't a neighbor. When I opened the door, there she was. Amber stood on the porch, hair disheveled, her makeup smeared like she'd been crying or drinking. Noah, let me in, she slurred, trying to push past me. I need to see my kids. They're asleep, I lied, standing firm. You need to leave. Her face twisted into a sneer. You can't keep them from me. I'm their mother. You're the woman who tried to sell their childhood home to fund her affair, I shot back, my voice low and cold. You're the one who stole from them. And me. So don't stand here and act like you care about anyone but yourself. Amber's expression shifted, her drunken bravado faltering for a moment. But then, like clockwork, she started crying, the tears spilling as she leaned against the doorframe. I made mistakes, Noah, she sobbed. But I love you. I love us. Please, let me come home. We can fix this. There it was, the same manipulative play she'd been running for months, banking on my sympathy to weasel her way back in. But I wasn't falling for it this time. Not after everything she'd done. Amber, you don't love me, I said, stepping back and pulling the door with me. You loved the life I gave you, the comfort, the money, the stability, but you threw all of that away. And now you're reaping what you sowed. Her tears turned to anger in an instant. You think you're better than me? She screamed, slamming her hand against the door. You're nothing without me. You wouldn't even have this house, this life, if it weren't for me. Get off my property before I call the cops, I said, my tone deadly calm. This is your last warning. She staggered backward, her expression a mixture of rage and desperation. You're going to regret this, Noah, she hissed. Mark my words. Good night, Amber, I said, and shut the door in her face. I waited until I heard her car start and peel away before letting myself breathe. The next morning, I explained the situation to Emma and Liam. Your mom came by last night, I said gently. She wanted to see you, but I told her it wasn't a good time. Is she okay? Emma asked, frowning. I hesitated, then decided honesty was best. She's struggling right now, I said. She made some bad choices, and it's going to take her a while to figure things out, but we're going to be okay. We're strong, remember? Emma nodded, her lips pressed together. We don't need her, she said quietly. She just makes things worse. Her words cut deeper than she knew, but I didn't argue. Liam, meanwhile, didn't even ask about Amber. He just climbed into my lap, clutching his stuffed dinosaur like nothing had happened. Amber tried a few more stunts in the weeks that followed, showing up at Liam's soccer game uninvited, sending letters filled with fake apologies and promises she had no intention of keeping. Each time I shut her down. I had spent years cleaning up her messes, covering for her lies, and hoping she'd change. But I was done. She didn't deserve another chance to destroy the life I was rebuilding. Eventually, her efforts fizzled out. Whether she got tired of being ignored or moved on to her next victim, I didn't care. My focus was on Emma and Liam, giving them the stability they deserved and making sure they knew they were loved. Amber became a distant memory, a shadow of a life we'd left behind. And though I would always carry the scars of her betrayal, I refused to let them define me, or my kids. Update. Hey Reddit, back with another update because Amber has managed to outdo herself yet again. It's been a while since the Derek disaster, and life has been solid for me and the kids. Emma's thriving as a soccer star. Liam's still my little Lego architect, and we've built a life with peace and stability. But of course, Amber can't let us have that without one last cringe-worthy comeback attempt. Out of the blue, Amber lawyered up and filed to modify custody. Why? Because she suddenly decided she's rehabilitated and wants to play mommy again. The court absolutely roasted her. Between her criminal history, hello, forgery and theft, and Rick's evidence of her shady financial moves, she didn't stand a chance. Petition denied. Game over. Before that custody stunt got shut down, Amber tried a few surprise visits to make it look like she cared. One time, she showed up at Liam's soccer game uninvited, yelling from the sidelines like she was team mom or something. The other parents were like, "Who is this lady?" Liam barely even acknowledged her. Another time, she cornered Emma after school and tried to guilt trip her with tears and promises to make things right. Emma shut her down like a pro, told her to stop lying, and walked away. That kid is a rock star. After the custody denial, Amber decided to pull the pity card. She started calling me nonstop, leaving these wild voicemails about how she made mistakes and how we should forgive her for the kids' sake. The cherry on top? She showed on my porch one night, demanding to see the kids. She screamed about how I was poisoning them against her, and then flipped to sobbing about how she missed our family. I told her to leave before I called the cops. That was the last time she tried pulling that stunt. Meanwhile, the kids and I are doing better than ever. We've turned the house into our home. Fresh paint, new furniture, and a trampoline the kids saved up for. Max, our golden retriever, keeps us all busy and happy. Emma's winning soccer tournaments, Liam's building insane Lego worlds, and we're planning a big Grand Canyon trip next summer. Life feels lighter, calmer, and finally ours. Amber? She's a distant memory at this point. The kids barely mention her, and I'm not about to push it. If she wants to be a mom someday, she has to prove it. Not just with words, but with actions. So far, she's only proven she's good at making bad decisions. Anyway, that's where we're at. Amber can keep spiraling, but me and the kids, we're moving forward. One step, one Lego tower, and one soccer goal at a time. Update 2: Hey Reddit, it's been a few months since my last update, and while life for me and the kids has been great, Amber's antics haven't completely faded. But I'll get to that. Out of nowhere, Amber popped up again, trying a new angle. She reached out to me directly, big mistake, and claimed she had turned over a new leaf after attending some sketchy-sounding healing retreat. She said she wanted to make amends and start fresh as co-parents. This might have been almost believable if she hadn't immediately followed it up by asking for money. Yes, money. Her excuse? She wanted to get back on her feet to better support the kids. Sure, Amber. I didn't engage. My lawyer did. Amber tried filing another custody modification, claiming she had changed and deserved partial custody. Her pitch? Bunch of dubious character references from people who probably didn't know the full story. My lawyer, Rick's rock-solid evidence, and Amber's criminal record made quick work of her case. The court wasn't having it. The judge shut her down again, emphasizing the need for stability in the kids' lives, which Amber has consistently proven she can't provide. Here's where things get even messier. Turns out, Amber's back to her old ways. Rick, yes, he's still my go-to PI, uncovered that she's involved with yet another shady character, this time a wannabe entrepreneur who's already been sued for fraud twice. Amber seems to have a type. While this doesn't directly impact me and the kids, it's clear she's still chasing the same toxic cycle that got her into trouble in the first place. Emma and Liam are handling everything like champs. Amber has tried reaching out a few times. Letters, random social media messages, even sending Liam a birthday card with cash in it, which he immediately handed to me saying, I don't want it. Emma is especially protective of Liam and makes it clear she doesn't trust her mom. The last time Amber tried to guilt-trip Emma, my 12-year-old looked her dead in the eye and said, You only care when it's convenient for you. I've never been prouder. The kids and I have officially moved forward. We've turned our house into a true sanctuary. Emma picked out a new paint color for her room. Purple, of course. And Liam's Lego empire now includes a theme park. We've also started a family tradition of Sunday hikes with Max, which the kids love. Next summer, we're still planning our Grand Canyon trip, and I'm working on surprising them with tickets to Disneyland too. Amber's influence has become nothing more than background noise. She occasionally pops up with her drama, but we're unfazed. My focus is on my kids and giving them the life they deserve, one free of lies, chaos, and betrayal. So, to anyone out there dealing with a similar situation, remember this. You can't control someone else's choices, but you can control how you respond to them. For me, that meant choosing peace, stability, and unconditional love for my kids. Amber can keep spiraling, but we're building something real, something she'll never touch again. Thanks for sticking with me through this journey, Reddit. Here's to brighter days ahead. This story is titled, After Coming Back from a Girl's Trip. My fiancé asked for an open relationship. I kicked her out. Hey everyone, we put a lot of time and effort into finding these stories to keep bringing you the best content. If you enjoy what we do, it would mean the world if you hit that subscribe button. Your support really makes all the difference and keeps this journey going strong. Thanks so much for being here with me. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, Hi all, I'm not sure if I'm overreacting here, so let me know what you think. Alright, so here's how it all started. My fiancé, 27 female, now ex-fiancé, and I, 28 male, been together for 5 years, and for the most part, things were good, or at least I thought they were. We met in college during our sophomore year, and everything just clicked. She was smart, funny, and had this energy about her that made you want to be around her. We started off as friends, but it didn't take long for things to get more serious. Fast forward a few years, and we were living together, sharing bills, planning a future. Getting engaged felt like the natural next step, and when I proposed last year, she said yes without hesitation. We'd even started talking about buying a house and having kids someday. That's what made this whole situation so hard to process. I wasn't just losing my fiancé, I was losing the life we'd been building together. Just got back from this big girls' trip with her friends. She was gone for about a week, and everything seemed fine before she left. She was excited, making plans, talking about all the stuff they were going to do. I was happy for her, even encouraged her to go and have a good time. She works hard, and I figured a break would do her good. When she got back, though, something felt off. I'm not sure how to describe it exactly, but it was like she wasn't fully there. You know when someone's physically present but their mind is somewhere else? That's what it felt like. Normally, after we've been apart for a few days, she'd greet me with a big smile and a hug, and she'd be eager to share every detail about her trip. But this time she barely said a word. I asked her how it went, and she just shrugged and said, "It was fine." Then she walked past me and went straight to the bedroom, leaving her suitcase by the door. I ignored it, thinking maybe she was just tired, but even that night, when we were eating dinner, she barely touched her food and spent most of the time scrolling on her phone. It wasn't like her at all. Over the next couple of days, though, her behavior got weirder. She was on her phone a lot, like constantly. She'd never been the type to obsess over her phone before, so that stood out to me. Then there was the way she started acting around me. She'd avoid eye contact, seemed distracted when we talked, and even the physical affection just wasn't there. I'm not saying we were all over each other 24/7, but we were always pretty affectionate. Suddenly, it was like there was this invisible wall between us. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was up. I decided to give her some space, thinking maybe she'd snap out of it. Relationships aren't perfect, and I figured if I backed off a bit, she'd open up when she was ready. But that was not what happened. Instead, the distance between us only got worse. So I tried bringing it up one night after dinner, asking if something was bothering her, or if there was something on her mind. She didn't bother, saying everything was fine and that I was overthinking things. But her tone? It didn't match her words. It was like she was trying to convince herself more than me. I let it go, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. 5 years together, and you start to pick up on these things. I didn't want to push too hard, but man, it was eating at me. What was going on? Why was she acting like this? A few more days passed, and I started to notice patterns. She'd get texts late at night and would flip her phone over when I walked into the room. I'm not the kind of guy who snoops or accuses without proof, but this wasn't normal. I thought about confronting her, but I didn't want to come across as paranoid. Instead, I tried to focus on work and keep myself busy. I figured if there was something going on, she'd eventually tell me. Boy, was I in for a surprise. Looking back now, I think I knew something big was coming, but I just didn't know what. One night, she came home from work and said she wanted to talk. My heart sank immediately because, let's be real, nothing good ever starts with, "We need to talk." I sat down, trying to play it cool, but my mind was racing. What could it be? Did I do something wrong? So there we were, sitting on the couch. I could feel the tension in the air. She was fidgeting, playing with her hands, and avoiding eye contact. That's when she hit me with it. "I've been thinking a lot about our relationship lately," she said, her voice calm but a little too careful. I raised an eyebrow. "Okay, thinking about what exactly?" "Just, how we could make it better," she said, finally looking up at me. "Better?" I asked, leaning back. "What's wrong with it now?" She hesitated for a moment, biting her lip. "Nothing's wrong," she said quickly. "I mean, things are great. But when I was on the trip, some of the girls opened up about their relationships. They talked about how happy they are because they've found ways to give each other more freedom and trust." I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. "Freedom and trust?" I repeated, confused. "What does that even mean?" She was twisting her hands nervously in her lap. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, like she was trying to convince herself this was a normal conversation. She wouldn't look me in the eye, though. Instead, she kept glancing at the wall behind me, like she was afraid of what she'd see if she actually looked at my face. It was the way she said it, too. So rehearsed, like she'd practiced the speech in her head a dozen times before saying it out loud. That made it feel even worse, like this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thought. She'd been planning this. She took a deep breath, like she was bracing herself for something big, and then she said it. "I think we should try an open relationship." I swear my brain short-circuited for a second. I just stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. "Wait, what?" I finally managed to get out, my voice louder than I intended. She looked at me, her face dead serious. "I've been thinking about it for a while now," she said, her words deliberate, like she was trying to convince both of us. "I think it could be good for us." I just sat there, staring at her, trying to process. "An open relationship? Are you serious right now?" "Yes," she said, her tone calm but firm. "It's not as crazy as it sounds. A lot of people are doing it, and it works for them. It's about trust and being honest with each other." "Trust?" My voice rising. "How does bringing other people into our relationship have anything to do with trust? Where is this even coming from?" She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Look, I know it's a lot to take in, but I talked to some of the girls on the trip, and they shared their experiences. They're happier now. They said it's brought them closer to their partners." I shook my head, completely floored. "And you thought, what? That I'd just jump on board with this? That I'd be okay with it? Her face softened, like she was trying to be patient. I didn't say you had to decide right away. I just think it's something we should consider. We've been together for so long, and I want to make sure we're still growing, not getting stuck. I tried to catch myself feeling a knot tighten in my chest. So now you think we're stuck? After 5 years together? You think the solution is, what? Sleeping with other people? She flinched at my words but didn't back down. It's not just about that. It's about exploring who we are as individuals while still being together. It doesn't mean I don't love you. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there feeling miserable. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 5 years. 5 damn years of building a life together, and now she wanted to throw it all like this? We'd never even talked about open relationships before. It wasn't part of who we were or what we wanted, at least as far as I knew. I asked her where this was coming from. Was she unhappy? Did she feel like something was missing in our relationship? She said no, she loved me and our relationship was great. She just thought this could be a way to make it even better. That didn't make any sense to me. If things were great, why would she want to mess with them? I told her that, and her response was, it's not messing with it. It's evolving it. I'm not gonna lie, that pissed me off. Evolving? This isn't a Pokemon. This is our relationship. I leaned forward, narrowing my eyes. Is this about someone specific? Did you meet someone on the trip? Her head snapped up and she looked almost offended. What? Oh, of course not, she said quickly, shaking her head. You're sure? I pressed, studying her face. Because this is coming out of nowhere, and it's starting to feel like there's more to this than what you're saying. I swear, she said, her voice a little higher than usual. There's no one else. I didn't meet anyone, and this isn't about that. It's something I've been thinking about, that's all. I leaned back, crossing my arms. You swear there's no one else? I repeated, watching her carefully. She nodded, her expression tight. Yes, I swear. This isn't about anyone else. It's about us. I told her I needed time to think. I didn't even know what to say at that moment. I went into the bedroom and just sat there for a while, staring at the wall. My thoughts were all over the place. Was this real? Was she serious? Did I even know her anymore? After about an hour, I came back out. She was still sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. I stood there for a second, then said, I can't do this. She finally looked up at me, her face calm. What do you mean? I mean, I can't do an open relationship. I'm not interested, and I don't think I ever will be, I said, my voice steady. She set her phone down on the coffee table and crossed her arms. Well, she said slowly, maybe we should take some time to figure out if we're still on the same page about what we want. That was it for me. I stared at her, trying to process how she could be so casual about this. 5 years, I said, my voice shaking slightly. We've been together for 5 years, and this is what you have to say? Like it's no big deal? Her face changed then, like she was starting to realize how serious I was. I didn't mean it like that, she said quickly. I just think we need to talk about what we want for the future. There's nothing to talk about, I said firmly. If you want an open relationship, then you're not the person I thought you were. And I'm not going to sit here while you dismantle everything we've built just because your friends got into your head. She sat there, stunned for a moment. You're seriously kicking me out over this? She asked, her voice breaking. Yes, I said, staring her down. Pack your things and leave. Her eyes filled with tears, and she started crying. I didn't mean for it to go like this, she sobbed. I just wanted to have a conversation about it. That's all. I didn't mean to hurt you. There's nothing left to say, I told her. This isn't a conversation I ever wanted to have. I can't do this, and I won't. She wiped at her face, sniffling as she got up and headed to the bedroom to pack a bag. I didn't follow her or say anything else. A few minutes later, she came out, her bag slung over her shoulder, and stopped at the door. Is this really it? She asked softly. It is, I said, not looking at her. She hesitated, then opened the door and walked out. I sat down on the couch, staring at the empty space where her things used to be, and felt like my whole world had just imploded. I kept asking myself how we had gotten to this point, but no matter how many times I replayed it in my head, I couldn't find an answer that made sense. That was the beginning of the end. The night she left, the apartment felt so empty. Her things were still here. Her clothes, her toiletries, all the little knickknacks she liked to scatter around. But she was gone, and it hit me hard. 5 years of being together, building a life, planning a future, and in one conversation, it all just crumbled. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I groggily grabbed it off the nightstand, and her name was everywhere. Texts, missed calls, voicemails. I sighed, scrolling through the messages. Please, can we just talk? One text read, Another one said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just want to explain." The voicemails were more of the same when I played a snippet of one. "Hey, I know you're mad, and you have every right to be. But please, just give me a chance to talk to you. I need to explain. I can't lose you like this." Then her friends started calling me. Apparently, they'd gotten wind of what happened, and they were all tripping over themselves to apologize. They claimed it was their fault, that they'd been hyping up the idea of open relationships during the trip, and she just got carried away. One of them even said, "We didn't think she'd actually bring it up to you. Like that made it better. I told them to get away with it and back off." I wasn't interested in hearing excuses or justifications from her friends. What pissed me off the most was that she let them influence her like that. If she was so easily swayed by her friends, what else could they talk her into? My family was furious when I told them. My mom kept saying, "You dodged a bullet." My dad, who doesn't usually get involved in my personal life, said I did the right thing by standing my ground. That support meant a lot because I was already second-guessing myself. Her family, on the other hand, was a different story. Her mom called me saying I should give her another chance and that she was just confused. Her dad tried to guilt me saying, "You're throwing away a beautiful relationship over a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding? She asked to sleep with other people. Bluntly, how is that a misunderstanding? The worst part, though, was some of our mutual friends. A couple of them tried to make me feel like I'd overreacted. One even said, "She was just being honest about what she wants." Isn't that a good thing? Yeah, honesty is great, but there's a difference between being honest and blindsiding your fiancé with something that completely goes against everything you've built together. One friend, let's call him Dave, really got under my skin. He kept telling me I was being old-fashioned and that I needed to be more open-minded. He even said, "It's 2024, man. Relationships aren't black and white anymore." I couldn't believe he was defending her, especially since he'd seen what I was going through. Then there was Anna, one of her closer friends, who let it slip that my ex had been talking about the idea of an open relationship before the trip. It seems that she'd brought it up as a joke during a group hangout a few months ago, and everyone just laughed it off. That made me feel even worse, like I'd been left in the dark while she'd been testing the waters for a while now. I spent the next few days trying to figure out what to do. She kept calling and texting, begging me to meet her and talk things through. Part of me wanted to hear her out, but the other part of me was still so angry and hurt. How do you come back from something like this? How do you trust someone who can so casually throw a grenade into your relationship? For a few days, I felt stuck in this weird limbo. On one hand, I didn't want to see her or hear her excuses. On the other hand, the idea of not getting any answers was eating away at me. What if there was more to the story? What if she'd been lying about everything, even before the open relationship thing? I remember pacing back and forth in my living room one night, going over it in my head. I even considered calling her, but every time I picked up my phone, I stopped myself. In the end, it was a couple of close friends who convinced me to meet her. "You need closure," one of them said. "Otherwise, this will keep eating at you." And as much as I didn't want to admit it, they were right. Eventually, I decided I needed closure. I agreed to meet her, mostly because I wanted to see if she'd come clean about what was really going on. Something was telling me there was more to the story, and I needed answers. We set up a time to meet at a cafe. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for. Maybe some kind of explanation that made sense, or at least an apology that felt genuine. But I wasn't prepared for what I was about to find out. I showed up to the cafe about 10 minutes early. I wanted to get there first, find a spot, and mentally prepare myself for whatever she was going to say. I was nervous, but mostly I just wanted it over with. She walked in right on time, looking like she hadn't slept much. Her hair was a little messy, her makeup was minimal, and she looked stressed. I'll admit, a small part of me felt bad for her, but I reminded myself why we were there. She sat down across from me, and for a few seconds, we just stared at each other. Then, she started talking. She apologized right away, saying she'd handled everything wrong and never meant to hurt me. She said the idea of an open relationship wasn't something she'd been planning for a long time. It was something her friends brought up during the trip, and she got caught up in their excitement. She claimed it was just a what-if scenario, something she thought we could talk about, not something she was serious about pursuing. "I never wanted to hurt you," she kept saying. "I just wanted to explore the idea together." I told her that if she really valued our relationship, she wouldn't have dropped something like that on me out of nowhere. She would have talked to me first, not waited until after some girls' trip where she clearly got influenced by her friends. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes, and said she understood. She looked genuinely upset, but I still wasn't buying it. Something about her explanation didn't add up. That's when I decided to ask her something I hadn't planned on asking. Can I see your phone? Her face went pale. I'll never forget that look. She hesitated for a second, but then handed it over, probably thinking I wouldn't actually go through with checking it. I'm not the kind of guy who normally does stuff like that. I've never felt the need to invade someone's privacy. But this time, I couldn't ignore my gut feeling. As I sat there holding her phone, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Part of me didn't want to do it. What if I found something that would completely change the way I saw her? But another part of me, the part that couldn't shake the gut feeling that something was wrong, needed to know. My hands were shaking. I opened her messages, and it didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There it was. A conversation with some guy I didn't recognize. They'd been chatting for a while, and from what I read, it was clear this wasn't just friendly banter. There were flirty messages, late-night texts, and even a couple of suggestive comments about seeing where things go. The first message that caught my eye was from some guy I didn't recognize. They'd been chatting back and forth, and it wasn't just friendly small talk. His messages were flirty, calling her things like babe and cutie, and she wasn't shutting it down. Instead, she was encouraging it, responding with laughing emojis and saying things like, "You're too much," one message from him said. "Can't wait to see you again." I was disgusted. That's all I needed to see. This wasn't just her thinking about an open relationship. She'd already started exploring it. I put the phone down and looked at her. She was already crying, mumbling something about how it wasn't what it looked like, and that it was just talking. I told her to stop. There was no point in lying anymore. "So this open relationship idea wasn't just an idea, was it?" I asked. "You were already testing it out." She flinched, her breath hitching. "No, it wasn't like that," she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. I was just talking to him. That's all. It wasn't serious. It was a mistake, okay? A stupid mistake." "A mistake?" My voice rising. "You were talking to him, flirting with him, making plans with him, and you expect me to believe it was just a mistake?" "It was," she cried. "I didn't mean for it to go anywhere. I was just curious. I love you, and I don't want to lose you." I looked at her, full of anger. "You already lost me," I said flatly. "The second you thought it was okay to bring someone else into us, you lost me. Please," she begged. "Please don't end this over one stupid mistake. I'll do anything to fix this." I stood there for a moment, watching her break down, but the anger in my chest didn't fade. "You made your choice," I said quietly, "and I'm making mine. We're done." I stayed calm because we were in public, but inside I was furious. The fact that she even entertained the idea while we were engaged was enough for me to walk away. She kept apologizing, but I didn't want to hear it. I stood up, told her I was done, and left the cafe. As I walked away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, relief, and even a little bit of clarity. I watched her as she sat there crying, trying to explain herself. It wasn't the kind of tears that felt sincere, though. It was like she was panicking, scrambling to fix a situation she'd lost control of. Her words felt rehearsed, like she was trying to say all the right things to make me forgive her. "It was just talking," she kept repeating, but her tone didn't match her words. There was no real regret in her voice, just fear. Fear of the consequences, fear of being alone, fear of losing the comfort of what we had. And as I looked at her, I realized I couldn't do this anymore. No matter what she said, the damage was done. For the first time in weeks, I knew exactly where I stood. I wasn't going to let her drag me through the mud or play games with my emotions. Whatever we had, it was over. After that meeting at the cafe, I thought that would be the last of it. I blocked her number that same night and deleted her from every social media platform. I didn't want to see her, hear from her, or even know what she was doing. I was done. For a few days, I had peace. She didn't try to reach out, and I finally started to feel like I could move on. Then, out of nowhere, our mutual friends started texting me. They'd heard what happened at the cafe, and most of them were reaching out to apologize. I guess word got around about the guy she was talking to, and suddenly, people who'd been defending her before were switching sides. One of her friends told me she'd started dating the guy right after our breakup. I wasn't surprised. It was obvious at this point that she'd been lining him up in the background. What did catch me off guard, though, was how quickly things went south for her. Apparently, she was posting pictures of him on social media, trying to make it look like they were some perfect new couple. Mutual friends said it came off as forced, like she was trying too hard to prove something. One of her captions was something like, "When you find someone who truly understands you," which felt like a dig at me. But the funny thing was, people weren't buying it. A couple of friends even told me she blocked them after they called her out for moving on so fast. Then, just a week later, the posts stopped. No more pictures, no more cute captions, just radio silence. That's when word started spreading that he'd ghosted her, and she was losing it. She was telling people how he led her on and used her, but honestly, I wasn't surprised. It was like karma showed up to collect, and she had no idea how to handle it. When I heard about this, I didn't feel bad for her. Call it petty, but it felt like karma doing its thing. You can't treat people the way she treated me and expect everything to work out perfectly. Life doesn't work like that. Some of our mutual friends started cutting ties with her after that. They said she'd been acting toxic, spreading lies about me, and playing the victim. She was telling people I was manipulative and didn't value her, which was complete BS. Luckily, most of our friends saw through it, especially when they found out she'd hooked up with someone else literally the day after our breakup. It's wild how quickly people turn when the truth comes out. A couple of the same friends who'd told me I'd overreacted were now apologizing left and right. They admitted they were wrong to doubt me and said they didn't realize how messed up the situation really was. I told them it was fine, but honestly, it felt good to have their support again. As for her, she tried calling me from different numbers after I blocked her. I guess when the guy ghosted her, she started rethinking things and decided she wanted me back. She left me a voicemail saying she was ready to work things out and that she realized how much she loved me. I didn't respond. I didn't even think about responding. By then, I was completely over it. The person I thought she was and the person she turned out to be were two very different people, and there was no going back. After everything that went down, cutting ties wasn't just about technology. It was about fully removing her from my life, both physically and mentally. I pack up the rest of her stuff. She'd taken the essentials the night she left, but a lot of her things were still scattered around the apartment. Clothes in the closet, toiletries in the bathroom, random little things like her favorite coffee mug, and some books she always kept on the nightstand. Packing it all up was weirdly emotional. Every item felt like a reminder of the life we'd built together, and for a moment, I wondered if I was being too harsh. But then I'd think back to the cafe, to the messages I'd read on her phone, and any second-guessing disappeared. I texted her from a burner number, one she didn't have saved, and told her to pick up her stuff by the end of the week or it was going to Goodwill. She showed up 2 days later, looking like she'd been crying. I didn't let her inside. I handed her the boxes at the door, said goodbye, and closed it. She didn't argue, didn't try to push her way in. She just stood there for a second, like she wanted to say something, then left. That was the last time I saw her in person. After that, there were still loose ends to tie up. She and I had a few mutual subscriptions and shared accounts, so I went through everything and canceled or changed the passwords. Netflix, Spotify, even the utility bills. Anything that connected us had to go. I wasn't trying to be petty. I just wanted a clean slate. The hardest part was dealing with mutual friends. Some of them had already cut ties with her after everything came out, but others were still trying to stay neutral. I get it. They didn't want to pick sides. But for me, there was no middle ground. If you were still hanging out with her after all this, I didn't want you in my life. I told a few people outright that I wasn't comfortable staying friends if they were still close with her. Most of them understood, but a couple of people acted like I was being dramatic. You can't just erase 5 years like it never happened, one friend said. But that's exactly what I needed to do. One by one, I started trimming down my circle. It wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about protecting myself. I didn't want to hear about her, see her in tagged photos, or get updates about her life. A few weeks later, I heard from a mutual friend that she was still talking about me, spinning stories to make herself look like the victim. She told people I'd overreacted and humiliated her, conveniently leaving out the part where she was already talking to another guy. I let it roll off my back. I wasn't interested in clearing my name or setting the record straight. The people who mattered already knew the truth, and anyone else? Well, they could believe whatever they wanted. Eventually, the noise died down. Her name stopped coming up in conversations, and the texts from people trying to mediate or explain stopped too. It was like she just faded into the background, and honestly, that's all I ever wanted.